those who attended. I mean, other than it was amazing and Jeff Stahl is the best person in the world. Any surprises or insights? Yeah.
One really odd one, woman that was there from San Luis Valley. They talked about if you had water rights in 1890, you probably wouldn't get your water.
Yeah.
That's how, that seems like a long time ago. You should be able to get your water, but there was so much ahead of them in prior appropriation that in 1890, if you had an 1890 right, you might not get it.
That was surprising to me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heather Dutton.
I think I'll.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? So quick announcements. So the Norm Evans lecture is tonight. That's being put on by us. Pat Mulroy speaking. You can still come and attend. It's free and open to the public. It's at CSU Spur in Denver. Really good opportunity to connect with lots of folks in the water community. I think we got 100 people signed up to go, which is awesome. And then tomorrow is Water in the West, which is hosted by CSU Spur as well in Denver. And the theme of that symposium is on collaboration and different examples and success stories of collaboration at different scales and in different areas of water. So it should be a good event. Also, next month is December Book Club. So I saw a few folks meeting, but if you're signed up for your book report in December, don't forget, and you should be meeting with your group. And all of those instructions we've provided. Does everyone clear on what you're doing for December?
5 minutes.
5-minute presentation. Yeah. Doesn't have to have slides. Slides are a nice visual, but it's pretty open to how you want to present that information.
5 minutes each person in the group?
No.
Okay.
5 minutes total.
We can do
Everyone together. Yeah. Keeping it short and sweet. Key points. Then I read over your assignments from the empathic listening, which was very interesting. A lot of folks chose the option of like observing a conversation, which was cool to like see. A lot of people were just like in, public spaces, like watching a conversation. Some did choose the kind of the emotional bank account in the red option. How was that experience for you all? Was it challenging? Was it weird? Was it like helpful to you?
It's kind of weird too. I did mine at work, and so like watching colleagues interact with my headphones in, so I couldn't hear what they were talking about. Kind of was a weird experience because you feel just strained watching
just
other
like
people
watching it, yeah.
interact. I'm not much of a people watcher, so it was like, I feel a little awkward about it, but yeah. It was interesting to try to fill in the blanks mentally with what was going on.
Yeah. The other observations?
I'll just say it. I've had more fun watching people who are not empathic. But now you have an awareness of those skills.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're working with other people, it's like, without judgment. Anyway, but this brings it awareness.
Yeah, I read a lot of, you can tell a lot by the body language. So, who's doing this? Are people open and like kind of leaning forward? Are they leaning back? Are they, frowning? And just the different ways in which we actually interact with each other that we aren't often aware of. That signal to someone, whoever's in a conversation with you, that you are listening or you're not listening, you're not open to that. I think it was Shelby had a really interesting story of like couples interacting, and like one couple was like telling a story and like really excited, and the other couple was like, couldn't get a word in and was trying to, and finally they kind of just gave up and became disinterested. And so it's like, those interactions, even with like friends or people, you're out for an enjoyable time and like it's not always a two-sided conversation, right? Also like folks that are hard of hearing, that was a interesting thing. Yeah.
I only have 70% of my hearing. So, and since I was like 18 years old, and so that is how I communicate. I have hearing aids. But until I got my hearing aids, I spent a long time. That was my main communication, was watching people's, body language and communicating that way. So, yeah, I'm glad everybody else gets to see that in already.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then like, yeah, it's like 10 situations and then all of a sudden like smiles or laughter and like the stress is kind of relieved. So yeah, I thought it was it seemed like you all got a bit out of it. Did anyone else try and like practice some empathic listening on the side? Aside from the conversation?
Yeah, I had one of the best conversations. A woman who was a colleague of mine, and she used to work in municipal government, and she went into consulting, and I just hadn't connected with her in a while, and we had a dinner set aside. So we got, 2.5 hours together, and she was actually feeding back to me exactly this. So I was showing up in that way, and she was showing up in that way. That was a part of her cadence, and it was a phenomenal conversation. Really meant a lot to me, and I derived so much from it.
Nice. That's great. Anyone else want to share? Okay. Well, last week, or not last month, it seems like last week, we kind of got the lowdown of water law and kind of the structure, administration of water. And we started to hear like, well, this big overarching theme of Colorado Big Thompson and all the kind of complications of that in northern water. So today we're going to hear all about that system, all about the different stakeholders involved in it, kind of the history. Unfortunately, it sounds like Brad is only able to join us for a short amount of time today, but we've got Jeff to give us kind of the big picture overview. And then what else do I have for announcements? Unfortunately, I am not going to be able to go on the field trip today. I am having a meeting before our lecture and like it's just too complicated. So I'm gonna have to bow out for the field trip, but looks like you're all dressed for success for the field trip and ready to go. That's a really exciting experience. And just want to thank Northern again for their hosting us here, for providing lunch, the field trip, everything. Thank you, Jeff. And yeah, any questions about the field trip or the day at all before we get started here? All right, well, I will introduce Jeff. Jeff is the Public Information Officer for Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District and leads its external communications on its myriad project, including delivery of the Colorado Big Thompson Project Water, Windy Gap Project Water, and water activity enterprises, including the Windy Gap Permian Project, lots of things. He's a native of Greeley, graduated from CSU with a degree in technical journalism, and spent 25 years in journalism before joining the district.
And I have a special guest to introduce. He just walked in.
Oh, Brad. Good morning. Welcome. Do you want to say a few? I know you can't stay for 2 minutes. Oh, okay.
Okay. Sorry, Jeff.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I will introduce.
So there's a board happening right now, and just so you know, here's how much he thinks of you all that he wants to be here.
All right. Well, I will introduce Brad then. So Brad is the general manager of Northern Water, and he's going to tell you all about Northern Water, so I won't get into all of that. He's a native of Colorado. He was raised on an irrigated farm along the South Platte River in Washington County. Began his college education at Fort Lewis College in Durango, and eventually attending CSU to complete a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and Civil Engineering. He went on to attend graduate school at University of California, Davis, and had a Master of Science degree in agricultural engineering, and more recently completed his MBA degree from CSU. He remains active in production agriculture through his interest in farming near Snyder, Colorado, and he's a registered professional engineer in the state of California and Colorado. Right.
Debbie? It's great to see you all. We'll get some slides ginned up here. We have.
We have,
50.
Yeah, we have a lot of time, so. Yeah.
Thanks for taking time to be in the course. Water's overly complex. I feel ashamed how complex the water is. Than any other natural resource. So important to our livelihood here in northeastern Colorado, but it's complicated. And every day I come to work and I marveled at how much I didn't know about how water is managed. Our history, everything we do at Northern Water, I think just like other organizations you might represent, the institution about water is so critical making that next decision. Emphasize that enough. I tried to send this the old-fashioned way through email to Jeff. I said, "How too big?" So sorry, Jeff.
No, it's okay. I've not run across this before, but I actually have too many things that want to share the same port on my computer. And so it is causing me just a little bit of heartburn, but I will be ready to go in just.
Good. Let me have some inkling of what Northern Water does. Great. Well, I'm gonna get right to it. I've been here a long time. This was suggested in my 31st year at Northern Water. And we are so blessed to have a lot of staff that come here and stay at Northern Water. I talk a lot about when I talk with groups about if we made widgets, if we made 10,000 widgets a day, you can bring staff in and you can train staff how to make widgets. Not being derogatory to widget makers, but you get my point. When you're in the water business, you go through a cycle annually. Annual cycle. You have one time to swing the bat and hit the ball once a year, just because that's how Mother Nature rolls. So in my career, I got about, I don't know, unless I'm getting terminated right now, which always can be. I have 35 times to hit the ball if I start young in Northern Water. And those first 5 times, it's hard to hit the ball because you really don't know what you're even swinging at. And for that reason, that institutional knowledge is so important to build on each and every year as Mother Nature throws us curveballs, which she continues to do. That's just what she does. And we've got other challenges. So I'm going to spend, it's okay, Karen, try to run through CBT, kind of the core operations of the project. Why is it supplemental supply? And you'll hear us talk about it. Supplemental supply. Very unique to Northern Water. Very unique to the West. This relationship with Reclamation, who owns most of the project, federal agency and Department of Interior. And Northern Water is quite unique in the fact that we, through the project's operation, provide a supplemental supply. Very unlike most of this reclamation projects built in the West, the 17 Western states. They were breaking new ground. They were coming to the West, and we're going to grow food and fiber. That was really the motivation for many of them. Think about big new irrigated lands in Washington, Oregon, California, a little bit of Texas, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana. Those were doing just that, breaking new ground, where our emphasis in the supplemental supply through the CBT project is adding a supply to the land that already was tilled in 1937. So here we go. Clear? Yep. Very good. Pardon? No. Cool. Here we go. So I'm going to talk about the CBT project, kind of our mothership. That's why we're a thing. In 1937, we realized there's opportunities on the West Slope to capture more water, working with Reclamation to build a project. I'm going to talk just a little bit about Whitty Gap. It's hard not to talk about them kind of together because one, in essence, relies on the other in terms of infrastructure, primarily. But I don't want to steal Jeff Drager's thunder.
It's Joe Donnelly.
Joe Donnelly, great. Because you're going to go up to Cheney Hollow.
Yep.
Wonderful. And he will talk more specifically about, Windy Gap Farming Project, AKA Chimney Hollow Reservoir. It's kind of the same thing, but I won't go into there. And then I love talking about things that keep me up at night, because I want them to keep you up. Supplemental supply, Stephen Long, came to the west and said it's pretty unfit. It's a pretty unfit period. This will never be a prosperous area in Colorado, northeastern Colorado, and people believe that for some amount of time. But folks who had strong hearts, and many of them Europeans who knew how to irrigate, also from the eastern U.S., and they were going to show us otherwise and rely on supplies, native supplies. So let me contrast that to supplemental or trans-basin supplies. So when I say native, or sometimes in Northern Water we call it base supplies, those are water supplies that are within our, in our case, our district boundaries, but they came to us by virtue of precipitation falling on our watershed, not brought from the hinterlands.
Mhm.
That's native and base. So they were using native supplies off the South Platte, off the Big Thompson, off the Pooter, off of Boulder Creek, off the St. Vrain, again, our district being northeastern Colorado, and they were finding ways to irrigate at that time in the turn of the last century, up to 226,000 acres in northeastern Colorado, primarily a lot of those on the South Platte. And they weren't doing it so successfully. They weren't early in the year when runoff was occurring, right? Our snow melts primarily in late May and June, a little bit early July. But when you get to August, late September, when you're really trying to drive a crop to home plate, there was not enough water in the basin. Just there was not enough. And coupled with some dry stints in the 1930s, there was a recognition by what then was called the Northern Colorado Water Users Association, kind of a precursor to Northern Water. The forefathers said, there's a lot of snow not far away from here, which turns into rain, into water. And if we just find a way to get that from the other side of the Continental Divide and bring that supply to our basin that's water short, we will have a whole supply. We will be whole. And that caught momentum. Tunneling technology was such that there was a way to get a tunnel to the Continental Divide to bring water from the western slope, where 80% of our snowpack occurs, into a region that's got 80% of demand. And so much of that concept of the CBT project and how it's to operate is memorialized in what we call Senate Document 80. Nice thing about Northern Water, we have 3 documents that drive much of our thinking. Senate Document 80, the Conservancy Act, which was created in 1937 to allow Northern Water to become a thing and have a relationship with the federal government, to share the responsibility of operating and paying out the project, and our repayment contract. So we have a repayment contract with the federal government. This project didn't come free. It came at a cost to both water users, which enjoy the water, obviously, and power customers who enjoy the power from the project. And together, the water folks, Northern Water, we paid off our debt. The power folks are still paying on some of their debt for the project. So I'm going to jump right to more specifics on who Northern Water is and jump into how the water gets from there to here and what we do with it. So I talk about our district boundaries. We talk about primarily, it's in the background greenish area from the southern and at least in the front range of Colorado, 120th. Oddly enough, half of the city and county of Broomfield is within our district, so that's the southern piece. Now, when I talk about this region, those are areas in which water from the CBT project can be legally utilized. Prohibition beyond that. People aren't paying the freight, they don't get the water. And we feel pretty darn strongly about that. We do a lot to resist CBT projects slipping across our boundary lines. City and County Broomfield, interesting history there, because remember, for some who've been in Colorado for a while, wasn't always the City and County Broomfield, right? It was 4 counties, right? Jefferson, Adams, Boulder, and Weld. Boulder and Weld were part of our district, so when they carved themselves out, we in essence have allowed them to kind of come back in, but only their northern tiers, which were in those 2 counties. So that's the southern end, north of Wellington, probably 8 miles to the irrigated lands. And again, think about irrigated lands in 1937. That's really what cast in place these boundaries. And it follows the tributaries I mentioned before to the Greeley area, and then on to, people think Kansas. A little newsflash, the South Platte goes into Nebraska. Believe how many times people say, "Well, I don't care about Kansas, I care about Nebraska." That's all the way to. So these peeps, this 1.1 million folks, including, I assume most of you, if not all of you, you're in part paying the freight for Northern Waters activities and enjoyment directly or indirectly to the CP project by paying your property tax, 1 mil ad valorem tax. So I'm going to jump to the project's operations. We have a distribution, even though we distribute water a little bit more broadly than this. This is our distributions service or area, so to speak, our collection area, and we shall not forget about another important reservoir in Colorado that everyone forgets about, and that's Green Mountain Reservoir. Most folks don't think about Green Mountain Reservoir as being part of the project. Even the West Slope, who enjoy much of the water from Green Mountain, and in the Conservancy Act, there's a requirement to provide compensatory storage. Compensatory storage. You have sinned Northern Water. You're taking water out of the Colorado River Basin, and by statute, you shall pay them back in some way, shape, or form. So Green Mountain Reservoir, which is a big piece of water, right? Between Kremling and Silverthorne, but in the Blue River. So much of that reservoir, not all of it, there's uniqueness in how it operates, is a gift to the West Slope. We don't want the operation of the CET project to impact your future economic opportunities. So much of Green Mountain Reservoir is released for municipal and irrigation demand, not just downstream, but ironically, it feeds more contemporary water demands upstream, like snowmaking. Critically important to the West Slope and enjoyed because of Northern Water. Don't forget that. You've got West Slope friends, remind them of that. So West Slope collection system, this was operated by Reclamation staff until 1985. Reclamation went through a phase where they wanted to lessen their employee footprint in the West, and Northern Water didn't take over the ownership, just the operations of the West Slope. So we today have about 22 staff who are headquartered in the Granby area, and they are responsible in large part, among many other responsibilities, but a large part of preparing for and administering snowmelt when it's running off of largely Rocky Mountain National Park, the other side of the continental divide, water that otherwise, if not captured, would go to the Pacific. And they find a way to get that water as it's coming from the north largely to the south. So Rocky Mountain National Park is up there a little bit. It's coming down into that watershed, right? Think about being in Granby. In Granby, things are coming at you from the north, but they're also coming from the south, right? So Winter Park's higher, the Frazier's higher, the south. But here it's coming from the north, and as it melts, we have a big bucket, second largest reservoir in Colorado, ready to capture that water and redirect it over the course of a year, if not years, over to northeastern Colorado. So that's most of the watershed. There's other elements of the project called the Willow Creek watershed, which burns extensively in these troublesome fire, and it captures water in a similar fashion, brings it into Willow Creek reservoir, and it's pumped. It's pumped about 100 feet into Granby, and boom, we got it collected. We got the ball in the glove. That's what staff over there worry a lot about. From that point, once it's kind of situated here, and sometimes not a bad thing, the water spills from Granby, it's full. We've enjoyed a lot of, as much as you hear about the Colorado River, and I'm not suggesting that I'm poo-pooing the changes we're seeing in our climate, we've been pretty blessed in our little watershed in northern central Colorado. Unlike the other parts of the Colorado River Basin, big watersheds in Wyoming, Utah, other parts of Colorado who've taken a 20-year hit. There's been some good years, but there's been a lot of bad years. And we've just been able to sidestep that. It's because we have a good PIO. Well, the project spills. Again, hate to lose water. Hate to lose water in the Pacific Ocean, but otherwise we get here. But at the end of the day, it's a blessing to have a full project, and we largely have had. It's a complicated project. I mentioned irrigated acres. That greenish area is about 1.6 million acres, but in terms of irrigated irrigable lands, about 615,000 acres, plus or minus, and we're over 1 million residents now versus when we were created, 115 or 150? 150. 157, I'm sorry, first year of delivery. Oh, first year of deliveries. It took from 1937 to 1957 to get this thing put in place, this massive project. We've got war, depression, challenging politics. But in 1957, there was 150,000 of us in the district, our forefathers and foremothers, and now we're 1 million. Not surprising. And the annual delivery of the CBT project back to 15, it varies drastically based on what our need is in northeastern Colorado. So this is also very good. If we have dry conditions in northeastern Colorado, then our board allocates more. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Very counterintuitive. Most projects in the West, particularly reclamation projects, but other irrigation projects not affiliated with the federal government, when they have more water, they allocate more water. If it's here, we're going to put it to use. That's not the underlying philosophy of the CBT. If we need the water, if it's been dry on the east slope, our board sets a higher allocation. If it's wet, we're good to go. A lower allocation. Pretty slick way to allocate water, but again, a little counterintuitive. But over the average, about 250 watt. What does that mean? What's 250,000? It's about a quarter of the supply. Think about our district boundaries, Broomfield to Wellington to Julesburg. About a quarter of the consumptive use demand in that triangle is met by CBT. So, not all of it, it's not half of it, but it's more than a drop in the pan. Complicated project, getting water, as you can imagine, from the west slope to here in concert with generating power. It takes a lot of machinery and canals and tunnels and pipelines, and that all happens essentially from here-ish to the Granby area. A lot of things going on. A lot of it's behind the scenes. You have to have a pretty trained eye to see, to be aware of some of the infrastructure of CBT. But if you drive by Lake Estes in Estes Park, boom, there you are. You are seeing a reservoir that was created as an after bay to a power plant, which sits right on the banks of Lake Estes, that if you didn't really have that geeky water eye, you might not know it's there. When you're in the West, this is a trick. If you're in the West and you're in love with water, you want to kind of know where things are. The trick is follow the river, follow the power lines, follow big transmission lines, because that's where they're going. That's right, Ron. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's where the stuff happens. It's just fascinating. You drive through Montana and Wyoming, all those lines, because they're going to take you to a hydropower plant in many cases. So we start Northern Water with a whole lot of impetus for supplemental leaf irrigation water to grow food and forage. In our district, what's the difference between food and forage? If you're not aware, what drives the ag economy in today's northeastern Colorado is forage, livestock. That's what drives what more or less what producers, farm owners are growing. We have a lot of livestock. In fact, in our district, my last calculation, I think we were 100,000 more livestock, beef and dairy than people. So it's significant. It takes a lot of feed to do that. But over time, that water was initially allocated much to agriculture, and that's where the energy was. Sugar beets are a rich part of that story. Growing sugar beets, which provides about 55% of our sugar in the U.S. Do you know that? 55% of our sugar comes from sugar beets, not just from Colorado. Big sugar production in Idaho, the Red River Valley, Minnesota, North Dakota. But that was a big drive at the time. We still have some sugar beets within our service area, but have fallen off significantly. Over time, we've had what? People show up. And people show up, we have communities that want to grow. We have this thing called special districts, which some of you, have you any special districts, people?
Think
Makes it sound
so.
like you're special, but
No,
special districts, some call them rural domestics, kind of a weird name, but those are a handful of districts we have within our district that provide treated water to rural or once rural areas. They're big players. As they came online in the 1960s, they were looking for a way to provide that need in rural areas and places where the water quality was so-so. My homeland of Washington County, right, the second biggest county in the state, least populated, for reasons I completely understand, had water that could chew until I was in about seventh grade, and a special district was created to provide a palatable, enjoyable water to that part of our service area. And that happens up and down the Front Range, and they're big players now. So that they were looking for water. How can we find a way to enjoy CBT water? So over time, for that reason and many others, there's a demand for that CBT water outside of the ag sector. Didn't mean those farmers quit irrigating. Many of them would just transition to the supplies in which they enjoyed before the project. Maybe running a little bit water short, maybe changing some cropping patterns. But that transition continues to happen, and there's 310,000 of those shares in which can be held. We call them units, but they're shares. 310 is kind of a weird number. It was anticipated at one time that the project was going to yield 310,000 acre feet. Didn't get built by to exact design, kind of right size during the Depression and other politics. And anyway, left the model of being 310,000 units. And those could be transferred freely-ish. Our board has ultimate authority on approving those transfers. But if one is seeking, hey, I want 1 unit, I want 50 units of CBT because I've got a new thing going on, I want to supplement the supply I already have. There's criteria. They need to demonstrate a beneficial use. Bless you, Debbie. You need to demonstrate a beneficial use among a few other things. You have to use the water within our district. I mentioned that. But those transfers happen. People pay cheddar and they transfer those units into their name. And then they enjoy the yield from those going forward. So that's all happening. But newsflash, right? This doesn't go on forever. Right? It's 310,000 units at some point. There's no more gas in the tank. The units that will be transferred will have been transferred. At Northern Water, we think a lot about when that day happens, and we're kind of starting to see that because some of these are going to stay in ag for some unique reasons. For example, in Boulder County, some of them are embedded within conservation easement. They're not going to go anywhere. They're tied to that land, if you will. But at some point, this dopamine, I call CBT, is going to end its supply, and it'll find its perpetual permanent home in municipal and industrial uses. Maybe a little bit unfortunate. It's not a Debbie Downer, but it's kind of is what it is. So what's the next game plan for this region in order to provide water for such important things that we do and how we're going to grow? I won't talk too much about this. I mentioned that our board allocates water each and every year based on the needs. We call that our quota allocation, our quota setting process. They do it every here in April, and this shows over time, I think this is the whole enchilada, 1957, 58 to near modern day. It goes up and down. And it's a responsible way. I never really thought about this for my first 20 years of Northern Water, but it's a really responsible way for a board to dialogue with the community, the water community, each and every year about what's the need? What's the need in the region? And based on that feedback, along with soil moisture levels, storage in local reservoirs, anticipated snow, existing snow, will that snow turn into water or not, which is always a crapshoot. They take all those things and more into consideration. Maybe a little bit of politics, dare I say. I think little, but all those things ultimately get captured in Northern Water setting a quota to then be allocated to its water users. No surprise, the unit of CBT, which originally could be had for $1.50, number of unit, because there's 310,000, but we only on average deliver 215. A unit isn't an acre foot of water. We call it an acre foot unit because there's too damn many engineers that work here. And that unit only delivers on average 0.7 acre feet-ish. So it's not even a full acre feet, but you can imagine with the supply and demand, it's not economic rocket science that over time, it's been the go-to. And it has immense value now compared to the $1.50 investment in 1957. That really did from the 40s to the late 50s. People were signing up for CBT. Next question.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
curious what the current going rate is.
So, yeah, I just leave those. Oh, no, here we go. So that's 60. It was pushing, now this is per acre foot unit. So you don't get a whole acre foot. Pushing maybe 73, 75. It's back down now to the mid 60s. So if you translate that into an acre foot, you're talking about 6 figures for an acre, a wet acre foot of water allocated from the project every year. Yes,
CBT can only be supplemental, correct?
that's right. And it's a pretty broad definition, to be honest.
What is that broad definition?
Oh, Cameron. We have some of our water users. We have 32 municipal and industrial water users within the service area of Northern Water. Some of them are like very, very heavily on CBT. So would be a stretch for me to say in their eyes it's matched equally or in some fashion with a native supply. Over time that will change because right the CBT game's about over, and they'll have to lean on some native supplies to make it a little bit more balanced. In my personal opinion, our policies allow for that. Oh, I'm just thinking, got a willpower warning. So, oh my goodness. So on the ag sector, for different reasons, our criteria for how water was issued to agriculture was a little bit stricter. And in most, I can't think of an instance where a landowner that marries up CBT with base supply, it's what you'd expect. Maybe a quarter of their supply, maybe a third of their supply. It's more balanced.
Yeah.
So wishy-washy, thank you, Karen, but it's kind of all over the board. Yes.
And just a follow up, with the shares, are they all outstanding and distributed, or does Northern Water hold back some shares for sale later?
We do in a very small way and only temporarily if there's a lottee. We call them allottees because they hold an allotment contract with Northern Water. If they find themselves in a situation in which, hey, I sold my farm, which boom, right away, it's like, well, you don't have a beneficial use. If you sold the farm, you're kind of in trouble in our eyes, kinda. We have a way that they can temporarily not give them to Northern Water, put into a pool in which they have, I think, up to a year in which to market those. But they're kind of controlled by Northern Water in that environment, but by and large, they're all outstanding, as they should be.
Forgive my ignorance, but if, let's say 70% of the share is delivered one year, does that additional amount get stored for
We have-
later years?
It's a great question. We have programs, came on in some forms in the late 1980s. One that's most notable is our, again, don't ever let engineers name things. Right, Jeff?
It's okay sometimes.
The carryover program, right? So, to Karen's point, if in fact you end the water year and you're like, maybe August was wet or September was wet, or it's like, man, maybe I'm a little bit rich on water. I've got some water left. This is a little unique to Northern Water as well. Other agencies were just shocked they don't allow for this kind of flexibility. It's like, okay, we get it. Hey, let's not waste the water. If you don't have demand, don't just go out and start irrigating lawns or fields. We have a program whereby they can put up to 20% of their ownership into a carryover program. It gets stored and it's available to them the next year.
Mhm.
Yep. And you can, some other ways you can buy that amount up or down, but I won't give you detail, but it really helps. In fact, I'd probably lose my job. It's very popular. It's very, I think it's forward thinking that they have another tool in which to deal with beyond our board setting a quota based on the hydrology supply. They've got this other tool of saying, hey, if I conserve a little bit, or I don't have the demand, I can roll it into next year, having a little bit more certainty than I otherwise might have had.
Mhm.
How do you guys square that with putting it to beneficial use? Like if you're not using it, you know what I mean, and you're rolling it over. I recognize the water conservation issue, but then also it's not being put to beneficial use necessarily. How does that work out?
We get comfort in, it's funny how we justify things, right? But that's a great question. There are frequent flyers, we might call them, that it's kind of suspect because you're doing this every year, or we're not seeing the demand. They don't have to put it in carryover. They can just, because it costs money to do that. We charge for storage fee. They can just say, oh, I guess I didn't need my CVT. Well, if that happens year over year, it kind of begs the question, well, speculating the S word? Are you hoarding? We don't, our board doesn't necessarily care for those things, but it's really hard to sniff that out. End of the day, I get comfort that 90% of our supply is kind of being managed in a way that benefits the region. That helps me sleep a little bit. But it's a great question. Yep. I talked about Green Mountain. Don't let your West Slope friends forget about it. Talked about the then 150 then over $1 million. Kind of the mix of our contract ownership. Then vast majority of ag, of course. You know why it's important to talk about sugar beets? Oh, Jeff, sorry. Oh, no. Because I went to high school, Brush. You know what the mascot is, Ron, at Brush High School? The Brush Beet Diggers.
Beet
Beet
diggers.
Diggers. Gotta just get it out there. Big ag, less M&I. But the big cities, Northern Colorado, were all in. The Fort Collins, Longmont, Loveland, Greeley, Boulder. Boulder was a latecomer. Might figure out, do we need the CBT or not? But ultimately, at the last minute, they elected to, and that's why Boulder Reservoir was a thing to help them along. And now you can see ownership. Ag's just a third of the project, roughly. But we have, I've been talking primarily when I talk about transfers thus far, it's in allotment contract ownership transfer. You're gonna give me a big check. Hopefully it's cashable, and I'm gonna give you 5 units. That's what I've been talking about to date. We have other programs in which there is more fluid, there I call it more informal. I mean, we track it. If Farmer Smith says, I don't think I need it this year, but this municipality is calling me and say, man, I'm short on water. Can you lease it to me? So even though our ownership has been driven to this, our deliveries don't mimic that, which is really good and demonstrates this flow of water that's meeting the demand of the region, wherever that demand point is. Sometimes it might be ag wanting more water, and often it is ag saying, I wish my second cousin wouldn't have sold those CBT units, so I'd like to lease some this year. So he or she brings those into their farming operation. Again, those are just annual deals. I mentioned hydropower, Ron, I'm sorry to cut this short. Whole lot of power generated.
This hydropower that pays the bills.
Now, Ron. Appreciate the checks. Water, by the way, but there's a lot of power generated. What's really, among many other things, what's really fascinating about the CDP project, we've got Northern Water staff saying, let's collect it in Granby, let's make sure we get it in the right place. Let's pump it a little bit up to Shadow Mountain and Grand Lake right before the west end of the tunnel, the western portal of the tunnel, and it just hangs there, and that's our responsibility. And folks from Reclamation, an extremely tight coordination with Western Area Power Administration, it's a handoff. It's like Northern Water saying, okay, it's your turn for a couple of days to run this water down the mountainside through the tunnel, which by the way is controlled in Casper, Wyoming, not here at Northern Water. Run it through the tunnel, run it through power plants, society, primarily in Colorado, parts of Nebraska, Wyoming, enjoy that sustainable, renewable energy supply. And then it gets to the east slope through that almost last power plant, I'll say. It really is a handoff back to Northern Water and say, okay, let's get this water in the terminal reservoirs of the CB2 project, which is Horsetooth and Carter primarily. The Northern staff are getting in position there, and of course those facilities are owned by the federal government until we release water from those facilities. That's owned by those canals and pipelines are owned by Northern Water. So it's really a very kind of organic process and a lot of coordination. Multiple phone calls every day about who's ordering water, where it is, and where it's going to go. I should say, back that up here. In more recent years, Northern Water's been looked to make other kind of one-off investments in the project or extension of the project on behalf of what we call participants. So in situations where likely many participants come to us and say, hey, we think Northern Water, you're the right agency to help us put in a pipeline to better transmit water supply to those service areas. We have taken that on and we create government-owned business enterprises to do that. So we have pipelines, Southern Water Supply Project pipeline, for example, going south into Boulder County and east into Morgan County, into my homeland, which are owned by, enjoyed by participants of that new infrastructure. That was built in the 1990s and 2000s. And we have other examples of that as well. I mentioned earlier, 33 municipalities, 120 ditch companies in which we're coordinating the delivery of CB22. Talked about the number of acres within our entire district. And the fact that there's a allotment contract, when you boil it all down, you get 1/310th percentage or 1/310th of the yield of the project, just based on some simple math.
So this is something I normally don't get into when I present, but this is a savvy group. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of return flow?
Oh my God, Jeff, really?
Just for 3 minutes.
3 minutes left? Important. You talk about other trans basin supplies, or is this kind of, okay?
Yeah.
Most trans basin supply, if you bring a supply from another part of Colorado, water that otherwise you would not enjoy in your watershed, by and large, statutes would guide, along with court opinions, that if you do that, you can enjoy that drop of water to extinction. But you can use it, reuse it, because until it just evaporates. It goes to a plant, it goes off my towel in the morning if I take a shower, whatever. You can enjoy every piece of that drop of water. Unlike most native supplies, not all, certainly pre-1980 water rights, so that's most of them in terms of yield, you only get to use that water once. And then the return flows are dedicated back to the stream. So far, so good. CBT is one of those unique unicorns in which, by virtue of negotiations our allottees that are allottees, the owners of the contract. Remember, the federal government owns most of the water right. Water owns a little piece of the water right. But our allottees only enjoy the first use. So if you're an irrigator, there's deep percolation, there's runoff beyond your field, you don't get to capture that and use it again. It's dedicated by negotiations, by contract, back to water users downstream but within our district. Where this gets tricky is on the municipal side, where we're gonna need to advance our thinkings around our water ethic and water conservation. You can imagine a lot of communities are thinking about gray water systems, using water harder and maybe even to extinction. That's all well and good. That's the right thing to do. Not allow the CBT. So that's going to be that's a hard pill for many to swallow. I get it. As they make these kind of investments, we are keen on watching and making sure, yeah, you should do that. Do that with your other supplies. Ixnay on CBT. Don't be using that to extinction, because we have a dedication to get that water, that return flow downstream. And that was all sheer negotiation politics. Why? Because farmers downstream, my forefathers, probably because they're painful people, said, well, we're not going to buy in this project. We're not going to vote in favor of this project because you cannot deliver water down the South Platte to Morgan, Logan, Sedgwick County. It just physically can't be done. And I agree. Well, what if we make sure the return flows that you enjoy, which residential use is a big piece, right? Shower toilets. Where does 95, 98% of the water go? Back to a treatment plant, back to the stream. So they knew that at that time, and that was the deal that was cut. So by contract, negotiation and contract, we're obligated to protect those return flows downstream. Thank you. As long as you're happy, Jeff. Can I have another 7 minutes, Karen?
Yeah.
So, Joe Donovan been talking about Windy Gap. There was elements of Windy Gap that were envisioned to be part of the CBT project. Again, because of different reasons, it didn't get built that way. But there was recognition in the 50s and 60s. Well, twofold. One is there's still water over there. It's not yet appropriated, not yet enjoyed by the western slope. Maybe we should think about tapping on the door again. And B, this recognition that CBT is starting to transfer away from ag. Should we, as a community in northern Colorado, go seek another water supply to minimize that? Not eliminate it. Hopefully it happens anyway. But maybe another supply injected in northern Colorado might buy down that tension, if you will, of needing a new supply. That was called the Windy Gap Project, which is a pumping plant just downstream of where the Fraser and the Colorado River join one another. So it's downstream of the collection system of the CBT. And the Windy Gap project was built, brought online in 1985. It's owned by the municipal sub-district of Northern Water. That's inside baseball, but Northern Water has an umbrella agency called Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. The Conservancy Act allows for sub-districts with one-off missions to be created under that umbrella. So we have a municipal sub-district, which is the owner of the Windy Gap project. And it pumps water under junior water right off the Colorado River into Lake Granby. It leases capacity from the project, from the federal government, and frankly from Northern Water. And it carries Windy Gap water through the project. And it needed badly to be fully successful. It needs its own storage. And that's the punchline of why you're going to see Chimney Hollow. That's what Chimney Hollow is, to firm Windy Gap supplies, because there wasn't always supply, there wasn't always storage available in Windy Gap Reservoir. So there's no storage, there's no room in the end. Your water right doesn't really yield you a whole lot. And that's owned by, that's a fewer subset. We have about 1,400 owners of CBT units. And then we're ag, municipal, industrial. 17, Jeff? Yeah, we're not. That's hard to hold. But total ownership of Windy Gap, it's 17 or 19. Let's just say less than 20. Those are that's the set of owners of Windy Gap. A subset of that is Windy Gap Program. Joe will talk more about that. But so my point being, Windy Gap is not, there's not hundreds of thousands of units out there. So it's owned by primarily municipalities, except for PRPA, Private Power Authority, is a large owner of Windy Gap, which runs the Rawhide Power Plant. Very creative way. Shouldn't say run it. It's the evaporative cooling needed in a thermal plant. So that's Windy Gap. That's an old picture of Windy Gap. Joe will probably hopefully show you a new picture of Windy Gap Reservoir, the pumping plant. And again, it's moving that water from its pumping plant right up the hot highway between Hot Sulphur Springs and Granby, kind of nondescript. It's pumping that water into the project when the storage is available. And I won't even talk about that because Joe will talk about it. So, back to one slide. So, let me just bing, 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 things that keep me up at night. Things are good in the water business, but they're not always that good. And we owe it. I think it's our responsibility to be thinking out beyond this water season to next, in the next decade. So I don't think any of these are going to be shocking. Maybe, Debbie, I don't know. We got kind of a shit show in the Colorado River. Mead and Powell are not in good condition. That's not a good way to manage the system. I think I'd like to think both the upper basin and lower basin, if you had a beer with them, would admit that. But who knows? I'm admitting it. We're better than that. And that's going to come to a head in the next year about how we adopt new guidelines in terms of how Powell and Mead should operate moving forward. Their operation plan expires, and there's tension there. There is certainly a theme within the upper basin and certainly within our state of Colorado, in which I think our Colorado delegation has done a phenomenal job advancing some issues that will be important to get through next year. But we're not using what we were promised. And we tend to think, many of us, that the lower basin has been using ample supplies beyond what they probably should have, and that should somehow get corrected in a perfect world. Don?
Do you think the negotiations on the Colorado River will affect the ability of Northern to manage the water?
I sure hope not. I'm not gonna die on that hill. These numbers came out about the overuse, I'll just call it that, in the lower basin. I think it'd be a sad day in Colorado and upper basin if we pull back on uses that are well below our allocation. But a lot of things are play. A lot of politics. We're going to have a lot of new faces. Reclamation Interior, obvious reasons, over the next 6-8 months, maybe even years. It's a terrible time. And putting the election challenges aside, it's just a terrible time to lose leadership in federal agencies when this is coming at us so quickly. That's a Brad commentary. You got to stay abreast of that. Don't let anybody tell you that we don't have a lot of supplies in northeastern Colorado. They're going to beneficial use. Look around our state, we enjoy the use of a lot of water. It's primarily ag. Why I say that is because others are looking at this point midsection to our underbelly of northern water. Other communities around Colorado who don't seem to have an appetite to slow down in growing, and gosh, you know, we could kick ourselves on that perhaps. They're looking around the state. And they look to the West Slope, and the West Slope is pretty much put the iron curtain up at the Continental Divide. Good for them. Saying no more water from the West Slope. You look to the San Luis Valley, there's been some attempts, but they're pretty rallied up around protecting their supplies. And similarly in the Arkansas, which has been kind of go-to for a lot of water supplies from whom? Our friends in the metro area. Not Denver Water, so the donut around Denver Water, which can grow, right? They can grow eastward to Lyman and then to Goodland, Kansas, and we take over Western. But they're looking here. My point is, pay attention to that. We argue here at Northern Water, you're gonna hear us talk more about this moving forward. The economic building blocks of water. I'm not talking about CBT, right? Because we got a prohibition against CBT leaving our district. But just base supplies, the supplies we enjoy around Greeley, around Fort Collins, around Fort Morgan. Those are the economic building blocks of our economy now. And they will be in the future, I contend. Now, will they be in irrigation? I kind of hope so, some. That's just the farm kid in me. I think food's important, as you can tell. But future generations might elect to use that water in different ways. Recreation, environment, for different kinds of housing or industry we don't even know about. Food crops we might not have a full appreciation for here in Colorado just yet. If that water goes, all that's gone. Don't fool yourself that we can have an economy that we enjoy without the core foundation of water. I believe that through and through. It's not unlike other elements of a successful society. Clean air, good universities and community colleges, safety, good workforce that's schooled up, smart. Water's right in there, and it all falls apart when it happens. So let's just not let this go away. That's what I'm lobbying. Our watersheds have a lot of fuel in them. This is East Troublesome in 2020. We at Northern Water, at least certainly me, and I think Jeff would say probably most of us, shame on us. We didn't think much about our watersheds. We don't own them. They're held mostly by the federal government. But it wasn't intuitive. We thought, we think a lot about collecting all the things I've talked about. Shame on us for not engaging at a higher level over the course of 50 years on what are these watersheds doing and how do we need to manage them. And that's something we just, as a society, that's not just a water challenge. We need to really engage in what's an appropriate level of management. How do we thoughtfully get fuels out of these forests? And I think that there's demonstrations. It's demonstrated you can do that. But as you can all imagine, there's parts of our society that are like, don't touch my forest. It's the sacred ground. And I get some of that, but at some point when you remove fires and you remove, I might argue, livestock, and you remove other factors that could help manage that supply, that fuel, then we're left with just massive amounts of fuel that are just powder cake. Growth, say no more. We need to think about our planning processes, in my opinion, and how to be smarter and improve our water ethic around water use in new growth. And not that we don't need to in existing build, it's just a lot more expensive. And clearly, over time, we need to make those investments. Some of that, a big push, at least by me, is how do some of these new developments and existing developments, and it happens from time to time, but not enough. How do you create a relationship with a nearby canal company to provide some of your summertime need, non-potable? We all like plants, they gotta be irrigated. Create that relationship with them to take some of your treated demand offline. This is crazy in America, what we treat water to do. Right? I think we all agree. What the hell are we doing? If we got other supplies that maybe are slightly lower in quality, but suitable for landscaping, it's a no-brainer, but there's a lot of social moving parts in what I'm preaching about there. A few more. You all have this problem. Jeff and I talk about this almost every day. How do you reach your peeps? This is a picture of this is probably a couple symposiums ago. We have 2 gatherings a year with water users and friends of Northern Water. It's not the only way we do outreach, but it is so tricky to tell your story. It's just, with all of us reading different newspapers, some of us not reading any of it. I always think, gosh, can we work with one of our water, because we don't treat water, right? Can we work with one of our water providers to put a little flyer in there saying, Isn't that Brad Wynn the nicest guy you ever knew? Well, Brad, we do it, but nobody pays their bills that way anymore. So there's no, I mean, how do you get to people when you have a message to tell that's important? And I don't think we have that figured out. I'm not sure anybody does, but it's multimedia. It's a bunch of stuff I don't understand. But it keeps me up a little bit. Ron, you'd appreciate this. A little bit one-off. I haven't talked about this. We share in costs with the federal government to operate the CBT. Water users pay half, and power customers through a kind of a unique roundabout mechanism pay the other half. It comes out of reclamation budget. And over the years, that budget's been flat, more or less. This is reclamation's all in budget. Now, there's been an influx over the last couple of years. Those big programs, and some of that's through reclamation. But when you have federal agencies, and I'm not advocating for let's tax and spend, I'm just saying when you have federal agencies in which their budgets are flat, at some point, you can't keep maintaining things in the, I'll just say things in the West. You can't keep maintaining the CBT project at the level it needs to, or frankly, Rocky Mountain National Park. If you have flat budgets, something's got to give, and we should someday have a conversation about this in society. It's a big, big issue. I used to say more than I say now. I worry about staff and staffing of the future. As you all know well, these youngsters, they don't come and stay. Right? And remember, we're not making widgets, and even to stay here for 5 years to find their ass with both hands. And when they come and go, youngsters, it's hard. It's just a harder way to attract people to Northern Water. When I was hired, we were a much smaller organization, and we came and we got hired and we stayed. And we're not seeing, I don't think any of you are probably seeing that. And that's just a reality, but it's something we got to grapple with. We got to find more attractive ways to keep them at Northern Water, more opportunities, more education along the way, whatever it might be, to keep our operation staffed up. Boom, boom, boom. The last one. What is that? Keep your eyes on that right there. Aaron, you know what that is? Perkins Canal.
Yeah.
Perkins Canal is mentioned in the South Platte Compact of Nebraska. And it's a little devil out there that Nebraska keeps threatening. They attempted to build it when the compact was put in place as a water supply for portions of Nebraska. And they have hinted, more than hinted to Colorado, we think you're getting the better end of this compact. We think we should put that canal in operation, build it, put it in operation. If that was to happen, it would turn the administration of the South Platte as we know it today on its ear and cause a lot of challenges with water users up and down the South Platte, as well as with a recovery program that's been so successful that we all lean on for recovering some shorebirds in central Nebraska. If Nebraska pushes forward with this, they have the right to do it. I'm not saying that's illegal. Keep your eye on that. It's a bigger deal than I think the water community is appreciating. Do you agree with that, Karen?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Questions for that?
Can you real quickly go over the funding sources again? You said half water, half solar, that's in the federal budget.
Yeah, that's federal. That's not Northern Water's revenue, but as we share in the cost of the facilities of CBT, most of them are straight up 50-50. Water, those who enjoy the water benefit, i.e. Northern Water, pay 50% of that cost, both in replacement and operations and maintenance. And I say power customers pay the other 50. Technically, those dollars come in the reclamation budget of an equal amount. And if the federal budget's held, then even though we have the ability, we're quite blessed to have a revenue stream that we think things need to be fixed, we want to throw dollars at it and make sure this project's ready for the next century. But if the federal government can't lift their ability to equate to that same amount, we're held down. And shame on us if we're not gonna keep this project up to snuff.
One thing on the power side, they have what they call a power repayment study, and they go out 50 to 100 years. That's how rates are set with all the replacements and things for both for the Bureau and for Western. It's going out, they don't use depreciation, they use, okay, for the easiest example, okay, radios last for 5 years. So in 100-year thing, we replace those radios 20 years in the process, keep the rates high enough so that we can get the money back into the reclamation fund.
With the flat budget that we were showing, there was an upward trend, 2015, 2016. Do you know what caused that?
I used to.
Okay.
There's something that happened in the US. Whether we were flush with money. You know, the monies we've seen coming through in recent years they're not dedicated long-term to reclamation, for example, through the Inflation Reduction Act and those kinds of things. But there was something that was happening in the US where there was a push to get some dollars out, or those excess dollars hanging out. I was trying to think, who was president in 2015?
It was Obama and then Trump. So 15, 16 would have been Obama. And then Trump was elected in 2017.
It could be something about the Colorado River, maybe. Was Reclamation throwing some dollars at the Colorado River at that time? I don't know, but it's
It was a one-time thing that's not going to
right.
reflect in the future. Probably.
And I think I think it's applicable to I think about assets in the West, and I think about that because when I go to DC, I think people are just really clueless about the West. I just really think that, and the investments it takes. They tend to do a pretty good job in the East because they're close to those things, but they're not close to us.
Yeah, 16 was the interim guidelines renegotiation. I don't know if that had anything to do
There were
with
big pushes of dollars then. We weren't upside down like we are now hydrologically.
Northern Water and the CBD projects seem very unique and special. Are there kind of peer organizations or like cousin projects throughout the West that you can look at?
Good question. In Colorado, kind of a smaller sister agency, if you will, would be Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District. They operate what's called the Fry Arc project. So it brings water from the Frying Pan River above Aspen over into the Arkansas Basin. They came along much later. There were some similarities there. They're a small organization. They don't have staff that actually work on the project like Northern Water does. But there's, the Central California project, the Central Arizona project, which are big projects, but I remind folks that the footprint of Northern Water, because we're delivering water, we are state of Colorado out of Green Mountain to go west to beyond Grand Junction, Fruta, and we're delivering over here water that ultimately ends up close to Julesburg. It's 422 miles. You compare that to other big projects in the West, the Central Arizona project and the Central California project. They are only a few miles. Actually, their footprint is only a few miles longer than that. So and now they move a lot more water. Don't get me wrong. 200,000 is a lot of water. But there's others that do much more than that. But this whole thing with supplemental, that's a little bit unique, particularly in terms of how our board allocates water.
How do you deal with people using more than what their quota is for? So if they overuse or the municipality using 110%, so 100%.
So we have the power of the gate. So they order water, they're calling us daily or emailing, ordering their water, and they have each of those water users has an account with us, and we're decrementing that account with each order of every day in which they take water, and we get to the end, you get to the end. And it's been a nice year, we shut the gate. I mean, we don't do that, but we don't have a problem with overuse. They get it. Yeah. And I think it's the end of the water year, and they're like, oh God, I still got a month left of certain kind of demand. They're engaging with other water users and leasing CBT. There's always something to be had out there, and they make those arrangements. And then in our books, there'll be a transfer from maybe Farmer Smith to Farmer Jones, and boom, they're off and running again.
Does that happen? in your district.
Absolutely. All CBT, it's to be enjoyed by the taxpayers who pay the freight. And our revenues come from taxpayers is the biggest chunk. Also, if you have an allotment contract, you pay an annual assessment for that. And then we enjoy revenues for some O&M work that we do on behalf of reclamation. Those are our three main revenue streams.
With the leasing, is Northern Water involved in that as an intermediary, or like, if Jeff had CBT and I needed some, I could lease it directly?
If you wanted to trade a cow for it, and that's all up to you. We require a certified notification of the leasee, to notify us, yep, I cut a deal. And I'm happy to transfer that block of water over to who's receiving the recipient of that water. And no, it's still got to be used within our district. And that's up until oil and gas development to the degree it is, well, two things, that, and we now have others kind of dipping their toe in the South Platte from the metro area, as I've alluded to. We didn't have to worry about it because gravity would always assure that water was not going to leave our district. It's going to be enjoyed between here and Julesburg. With oil and gas development, there's been known to be some pipelines that kind of find their way out of our district. So we watch for those things, and then we're got a heavy eye toward people like Aurora. When you come in our basin, I'm going to express a lot of concern about that being good for any of us in Northeast Colorado, but we will not take CBT. And we've got good law to protect that.
When you talked about supporting growth, once the CBT is already fully allocated, you said go find new water sources, we would have to go find a new water source. What does that mean? Where is it? Further away?
You'll hear from Joe Donald, you'll hear about the Wood Gap Plumbing Project. So that brings a little bit more firming Windy Gap. Is going to bring a little bit more supply from the West Lobe. You'll hear from Carl Brower's coming today. He's a program manager for the Northern Integrated Supply Project, which will be a new supply. That's a junior water right on both the South Platte and the Poudre. It's been a 20-year permitting process, so you have to have stamina in this game of water development, like other agencies, Fort Collins, Building, Halligan, those kinds of things. It takes time. So that will be another supply to the region. And then it'll be, I hope, a thoughtful conversation about, when we have often in our Northern Front Range, when that growth, which is where most of our growth is coming from, some that's occurring on irrigated land. So that is a supply unto itself. However that supply is transferred, and not always does it, because the biggest crime right now is when we have growth going on formerly irrigated land and Thornton owns the water right. We cannot let that happen. We can't let the best, most senior water rights in our backyard, top shelf, right? Top shelf, the highest quality bourbon, we're letting go south, and we're spending billions. Northern Water's going to spend $2.5 billion on NISP for a junior water right. Now, we need to do that for lots of different reasons. Shame on us for letting this stuff go down the road. This is Brad talking. When we're just toiling, for 20 years, building a permit and spending $2 billion and letting the good stuff go. We've got to find a way to hook or crook to lock up that water. Because when growth happens on formerly irrigated land, it's a water come from. It comes from our portfolio, sometimes of CBT. It's like, man, we had a supply, and when I say we let it go, it's not illegal. Landowners, irrigators have the right to sell that. I'm not denying that, and that's where tension can develop. And I will get calls with really mad water right owners saying, you are promoting an ethic that stymies my ability to market my water for the most value. I don't care.
So how do you prevent the most senior water rights from leaving?
No one has been totally successful in that, except for West Slope. I mean, at this point, I think they've done a phenomenal job of putting up a guard that's in part embedded in the water plan. There's some language off the side called the conceptual framework that pretty much sets the bar pretty high to even have a conversation about more water coming from West Slope. So I think there's concepts in future water plans where you just live by a different ethic. I'm not suggesting that's going to stop it. But let's at least have a conversation on what's an appropriate use of water. If you're going to go to Brook, Colorado, 135, 140 miles from Aurora, and you're going to sacrifice that community and that foundational building block for any future generations. What's that worth? How do you mitigate that if you can? Well, let's make sure we're not taking that water to Aurora for some ungodly use. You know, people are important. Let's make sure people have safe drinking water, of course. But it might balk a little bit if that's to put in golf courses and lots of lawns in areas in East Aurora. But that's Brent. Yeah. Our board's generally behind it. I'll get a little bit obnoxious about it.
Well, Brendan, is there any way to proactively create like a first right of refusal to buy water? I don't know if you were anything around trying.
There's concept around that, trying to be a little bit more aggressive. It takes cheddar. That takes a lot of cheddar. So I'm not sure we're willing, we in Northern Colorado, to tax ourselves to come with that kind of cheddar. But I think there's ways you can push on those issues and create a culture throughout Colorado where we're just not going to allow that to happen. Again, it's going to happen to some degree, but we can't have another Thornton come to Northern Colorado and buy 15,000 acres of prime farmland and just say, oh, well, it's just a transaction just happened. Too bad, so sad. Bullshit. Well, we got to stand up and say, no, that's not governor, whoever's governor going forward. That's just not how we're going to rule. Going to share a little bit of the resource, perhaps. I can be bought, but not cheaply. But gosh darn, you're not going to sacrifice Northern Colorado communities for the well-being of Aurora. God, it worked out, man.
We're at another round. We will take a brief break. So let's try for 5 minutes. We're a little behind, but
Sorry.
go. Thanks a lot, man. Yeah, good to see you too.
Good to see you. What's happening?
I actually, the field trip, I gotta go down for, we have a.
Oh, yeah.
Lectures tonight. And then we have water in the west tomorrow, but we're having. Lectures.
Yeah. So where's Kevin tomorrow? Oh. The 10th spot.
Yeah, both things are, yeah. Yeah, I want to see Pat Mulray first. Talking to him.
was unfortunate.
I'm excited.
Feeling Helen.
All right,
Okay.
thanks, Brad. Great to
Is that the way, or how did we have?
Yeah. Yeah, I got lucky. Good day. Last Friday, so.
All right.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, you too.
Oh. Yes, it's so impressive. Like going down. Trust just so significant. Just like.